Sarah Martinez had always been different from other women her age. At 32, she carried herself with a quiet confidence that came from years of training most people would never guess at. Her neighbors in the small suburban town of Millfield knew her as the friendly woman who worked at the local library, always ready with book recommendations and a warm smile for the children who visited after school. What they didn't know was that before moving to Millfield 3 years ago, Sarah had spent 8 years as a special operations officer with the military. She had served in some of the most dangerous places on Earth, completing missions that would never appear in any public record. Her skills in combat strategy and survival were razor-sharp, even though she had chosen to leave that life behind for something quieter and more peaceful. Sarah had deliberately picked Millfield because nothing ever happened there. The biggest crime in recent memory was when teenagers had spray-painted the water tower 2 summers ago. She rented a small house on Maple Street, surrounded by families with young children and elderly couples who had lived there for decades. It was exactly the kind of place where she could finally sleep through the night without checking the locks 3 times. On this particular Tuesday evening in October, Sarah was walking home from her evening shift at the library. The autumn air was crisp, and orange leaves crunched under her feet as she took her usual route through the park. She enjoyed these quiet walks, using the time to decompress from her day and appreciate the simple pleasure of feeling completely safe. The park was mostly empty, which was normal for a weeknight. A few streetlights illuminated the main path, casting long shadows between the old oak trees. Sarah had walked this same route hundreds of times over the past 3 years, and she knew every bench, every turn, every shortcut. Tonight felt no different from any other until she noticed the van. It was parked in the lot near the playground, engine running but lights off. Something about it immediately caught her attention. The vehicle looked out of place, newer and more expensive than the usual cars she saw in the neighborhood. More importantly, her trained instincts were sending warning signals that she had learned never to ignore. Sarah slowed her pace but continued walking normally. Years of training had taught her that the worst thing she could do was alert potential threats that she had noticed them. Instead, she used her peripheral vision to gather information while appearing completely unaware. There were at least 2 figures inside the van, both watching the path she was walking on. As she got closer, Sarah could see that the men in the van were focused on her specifically. One was speaking into a phone, while the other kept his eyes locked on her movement. This was not a coincidence or a case of being in the wrong place at the wrong time. These men were here for her, though she couldn't yet understand why. Her mind raced through possibilities. Had someone from her past military life tracked her down? Was this related to one of her previous missions? Sarah had made enemies during her years in special operations, people who might hold grudges for things she had done in service of her country. She had always known this was a possibility, which was why she had chosen such a quiet place to disappear into civilian life. The van doors opened simultaneously, and 2 men stepped out. They were both large, wearing dark clothing, and moving, with the kind of coordination that suggested they had worked together before. Sarah's training kicked in automatically, her body tensing as she prepared for whatever was coming next. "Excuse me, miss," one of them called out, his voice carrying a false politeness that didn't match the threatening way he was approaching her. "We need to talk to you for a minute." Sarah stopped walking and turned to face them, keeping her expression neutral and confused, like any normal civilian would be in this situation. "I'm sorry, do I know you?" she asked, letting a slight tremor enter her voice to make herself seem more vulnerable than she actually was. The second man had circled around to cut off her escape route back toward the main street. They were professionals, Sarah realized, not random criminals looking for an easy target. This was a planned operation, and she was the objective. "Just come with us quietly and nobody gets hurt," the first man said, reaching into his jacket. The movement was smooth and practiced, and Sarah knew exactly what he was reaching for before she saw the gun. The weapon appeared in his hand with professional efficiency, pointed directly at her chest. His partner had also drawn a pistol, holding it low but ready. They had her surrounded and armed, clearly expecting her to comply without resistance. "Please," Sarah said, raising her hands and taking a small step backward. "I don't understand what this is about. Are you police officers? The men exchanged. A quick glance and Sarah could see them relaxing slightly. They thought they had an easy target, a scared librarian who would do whatever they wanted to avoid getting hurt. This was exactly the impression she wanted to give them. Just get in the van, the second man said, gesturing toward the vehicle with his gun. We'll explain everything once we're somewhere more private. Sarah nodded, keeping her hands raised and her expression frightened. But inside, her mind was working at lightning speed, analyzing the situation and planning her response. She could see that both men were holding their weapons casually, confident that the mere sight of the guns would be enough to control her. They had positioned themselves poorly, standing too close together and not maintaining proper fields of fire. Most importantly, they had made the critical mistake of assuming she was helpless. As she took another step toward the van, Sarah was already calculating distances, angles, and timing. Her years of training had prepared her for exactly this type of situation. She knew how to disarm opponents, how to use their own momentum against them, and how to turn a disadvantageous position into a winning one. The men thought they were in control of this situation. They had no idea that they were about to face someone who had been trained by the best military instructors in the world, someone who had survived combat situations that would have broken most people. Sarah continued to play the role of a frightened civilian, but every muscle in her body was coiled and ready to strike. The moment would come soon when she would have to reveal who she really was, and these men would learn that they had made a terrible mistake in choosing her as their target. The moment Sarah had been waiting for came when the first gunman gestured impatiently for her to move faster toward the van. As he shifted his weight and turned slightly to check that the vehicle's back doors were open, Sarah saw her opportunity. In one fluid motion that took less than 2 seconds, she dropped low and spun toward the nearest attacker. Her right hand struck his wrist with precise force, knocking the gun away from her body while her left elbow drove into his solar plexus. The man doubled over in shock and pain, completely unprepared for the speed and skill of her counterattack. Before the second gunman could react to what was happening, Sarah had already moved. She grabbed the first man's jacket and used his falling momentum to swing him between herself and his partner, creating a human shield while she dealt with the immediate threat. Her knee came up hard into the first attacker's face, and she heard the distinct crack of his nose breaking. The second man was trying to get a clear shot, but his partner was in the way and Sarah was moving too fast for him to track properly. She released the semi-conscious first attacker and rolled to her left, coming up behind a park bench just as the second man fired his first shot. The bullet splintered the wooden bench, sending fragments flying. Sarah could hear the man cursing as he realized this was not going according to their plan. They had expected to intimidate a helpless librarian, not engage in combat with someone who clearly knew what she was doing. Who the hell is this woman? The second man shouted to his partner, who was on his knees holding his broken nose and groaning in pain. Sarah didn't give him time to figure it out. She vaulted over the bench and charged directly at him, using a zigzag pattern that made her difficult to target. The man fired 2 more shots, both missing as Sarah closed the distance between them. When she reached him, Sarah grabbed his gun hand and twisted his wrist in a direction it was never meant to go. The weapon fell from his nerveless fingers as he screamed in agony. She followed up with a palm strike to his throat that cut off his scream and sent him staggering backward, gasping for air. Within 30 seconds of the confrontation beginning, both attackers were on the ground, disarmed and injured. Sarah stood over them, breathing calmly despite the adrenaline coursing through her system. This was exactly the kind of situation her military training had prepared her for, and her body had responded automatically. She quickly searched both men, finding their wallets, phones, and additional weapons. The first man was carrying a knife and zip ties, which confirmed that this had been a planned kidnapping attempt. The second man had a photo in his pocket, and Sarah's blood ran cold when she saw that it was a picture of her. "All right," Sarah said, her voice now completely different from the frightened tone she had used before. "You're going to tell me exactly who sent you and why." The first man, still holding his broken nose, looked up at her with a mixture of fear and confusion. "We were just supposed to bring you in. Nobody said anything about you being able to fight." "Bring me in where?" Sarah demanded, kneeling down so she was at eye level with him. "And don't even think about lying to me." The second man was still clutching his throat and couldn't speak properly, but the first man seemed eager to cooperate now that their situation had reversed so dramatically. "There's a guy," Calls himself Morrison. He wheezed through his broken nose. He hired us to grab you and bring you to a warehouse on the other side of town. Said you had something that belonged to him? Sarah frowned. The name Morrison didn't immediately ring any bells, but that didn't mean much. During her military service, she had encountered hundreds of people, many of whom had used fake names or code names. It was possible that Morrison was someone from her past who had tracked her down for revenge. What does this Morrison look like? She asked, older guy, maybe 50. Gray hair, scar on his left cheek. Talks with some kind of accent, maybe European. The description still didn't trigger any specific memories, but Sarah filed the information away. She would need to do some research to figure out who this person was and what he wanted with her. How much was he paying you? Sarah asked. 10,000 each, the first man admitted. He said it would be easy. Just pick up some librarian and deliver her. We never would have taken the job if we knew you were... Were what? Sarah prompted. I don't know what you are, lady, but you're definitely not just a librarian. Sarah almost smiled at that. If only he knew the half of it. But this wasn't the time for explanations. She needed to figure out what Morrison's endgame was, and why he wanted her badly enough to hire professional kidnappers. She used the zip ties the men had brought to restrain both of them to a park bench, then called the police from one of their phones. When the dispatcher asked for her location and the nature of the emergency, Sarah kept her explanation simple. This is Sarah Martinez. I'm in Millfield Park and I've just been attacked by 2 armed men who tried to kidnap me. Both attackers are restrained and need medical attention. Please send police and ambulances. While waiting for the authorities to arrive, Sarah went through the attackers' phones, looking for any information about Morrison or the warehouse where they were supposed to take her. She found several text messages with coordinates and instructions, but nothing that revealed Morrison's real identity or his motives. The police arrived within 10 minutes, followed closely by paramedics. Sarah found herself in the surreal position of trying to explain what had happened without revealing too much about her background. She told them that she had taken some self-defense classes and had gotten lucky when the men attacked her. Detective Ray Collins, a man in his 40s with kind eyes and a no-nonsense attitude, seemed skeptical of her modest explanation. He looked at the 2 attackers, both of whom required significant medical treatment, then back at Sarah, who didn't have a scratch on her. Ms. Martinez, he said quietly while the paramedics worked on the injured men, I've been a cop for 20 years and I've never seen anything quite like this. Are you sure you're telling me everything? Sarah met his gaze steadily. Detective, these men tried to kidnap me at gunpoint. I defended myself as best I could. That's all there is to it. Collins nodded slowly, but she could see that he wasn't entirely convinced. Still, the evidence was clear. She had been the victim of an attempted kidnapping, and she had every right to defend herself. As the attackers were loaded into ambulances and taken away, Sarah realized that her quiet life in Millfield was probably over. Morrison, whoever he was, knew where she lived and wasn't going to give up after one failed attempt. She was going to have to go back to thinking like a soldier if she wanted to survive whatever was coming next. After giving her statement to the police, Sarah returned to her house on Maple Street with Detective Collins following in his patrol car. He insisted on checking her home for any signs that it had been watched or compromised, and Sarah was grateful for his thoroughness even as she conducted her own more detailed security assessment. While Collins examined the obvious places like windows and doors, Sarah checked for the subtle signs that someone with professional training would leave behind. She found evidence that her home had indeed been under surveillance for at least several days. Tiny scratches on her back door lock suggested someone had practiced picking it, and there were footprints in the flower bed under her bedroom window that didn't belong to her or any of her neighbors. "Detective," Sarah called out, pointing to the disturbed soil. "You might want to see this." Collins came over and examined the footprints with his flashlight. Size 11 or 12 boots, fairly new treads. Whoever was here was definitely watching your house. He looked up at her with concern. "Ms. Martinez, I think you should consider staying somewhere else tonight. Maybe with family or friends?" Sarah shook her head. "I don't have any family in the area, and I don't want to put anyone else in danger." What she didn't tell him was that running away had never been her style, and she wasn't about to start now. After Collins left, promising to have patrol cars drive by regularly during the night, Sarah began implementing security measures that would have seemed paranoid to most people, but were simply good sense to someone with her background. She moved furniture to create clear sightlines to all entrances, positioned makeshift early warning systems using household items, and selected several potential escape routes from different parts of the house. More importantly, she accessed a storage locker across town that she had maintained for exactly this type of situation. Inside were items from her previous life that she had hoped never to need again. Secure communication equipment, false identification documents, cash, and weapons. Sarah spent the next morning researching everything she could find about Morrison and the warehouse location the attackers had mentioned. Using skills she had learned in military intelligence, she cross-referenced property records, business registrations, and police reports to build a picture of what she was dealing with. The warehouse was registered to a shell company that appeared to exist only on paper. The property had been purchased 6 months ago with cash, and there were no utility records or business licenses associated with it. This suggested that whoever Morrison was, he had resources and knew how to cover his tracks. Her research into the name Morrison was less successful. Without more specific information, it was like looking for a needle in a haystack. She had encountered dozens of people during her military service who could fit the basic description the attacker had given her. Around noon, Sarah's secure phone rang. Only 3 people had this number: her former commanding officer, a contact at the CIA, and her best friend from her old unit, who had also left the military. The caller ID showed it was Colonel James Harrison, her former CO. Sarah, Harrison's familiar voice was tense with concern. "I just got word about what happened to you last night. Are you all right?" "I'm fine, Colonel. But I think someone from the past has found me." "That's what I was afraid of. Sarah, I need you to listen to me very carefully. 3 days ago, someone broke into a secure facility and stole classified files. Among those files was information about Operation Nighthawk." Sarah's blood ran cold. Operation Nighthawk had been one of her last missions before leaving the military, and it had involved eliminating a weapons dealer who had been selling advanced technology to terrorist organizations. The mission had been successful, but it had also made her some very dangerous enemies. "How much information was in those files?" Sarah asked. "Everything. Your real name, your cover identity, your current location." "Sarah, the man you knew as Viktor Kozlov didn't die in that warehouse explosion 3 years ago. He survived, and he's been looking for you ever since." Now the pieces were falling into place. Viktor Kozlov had been the weapons dealer she had been sent to eliminate during Operation Nighthawk. He had called himself Morrison now, probably one of many aliases he used. The scar on his face would be from the explosion that was supposed to have killed him. "He wants revenge," Sarah said, more to herself than to Harrison. "It's worse than that," the colonel continued. "Intelligence suggests he's not just after you personally. He believes you have something that belongs to him, something you took during the mission." Sarah frowned. "I didn't take anything from that warehouse except the intelligence we were sent to retrieve." "The microchip, Sarah. The one with the weapon specifications. According to our records, you never turned it in after the mission." Sarah's mind raced back to that night 3 years ago. The mission had gone sideways when Kozlov's security team had been better prepared than expected. She had managed to infiltrate the warehouse and locate the microchip, but then the building had come under attack from a rival criminal organization. In the chaos that followed, with explosions and gunfire everywhere, she had focused on surviving and escaping. "Colonel, I was nearly killed in that explosion. I barely made it out alive. If I still have that chip, I don't know where it is." "You need to find it, Sarah. That chip contains specifications for a new type of portable missile system. In the wrong hands, it could be used to shoot down civilian aircraft. Kozlov wants it back, and he's not going to stop until he gets it or confirms that it's been destroyed." After ending the call with Harrison, Sarah sat in her living room trying to remember every detail of that chaotic night 3 years ago. She had been wearing a tactical vest with multiple pockets, and in the confusion of the explosion and escape, it was possible that she had retained the microchip without realizing it. She went to her bedroom and pulled out the sealed storage container where she kept her gear from that final mission. Everything had been cleaned and stored away when she decided to leave military life behind. But she had kept it for sentimental reasons. As she went through each piece of equipment, Sarah found what she was looking for in a small pocket of her tactical vest that she had forgotten existed. The microchip was there, sealed in a protective case, exactly where she had put it during the mission. Holding the tiny device, Sarah realized that she now had what Viktor Kozlov wanted. but she also had something much more dangerous. If the chip contained the specifications Harrison had described, it could not be allowed to fall into the wrong hands under any circumstances. Her phone rang again, this time showing an unknown number. When she answered, a voice with a slight European accent spoke, "Ms. Martinez, or should I say Major Martinez, I believe you have something that belongs to me." "Kozlov," Sarah said, "I thought you were dead. As you can see, reports of my death were greatly exaggerated. My associates who tried to collect you last night were not as competent as I had hoped, but they served their purpose. Now you know that I am serious about recovering my property. What makes you think I have anything of yours? Please, Major, let us not play games. You took something from my warehouse 3 years ago and I want it back. I am prepared to make you a generous offer for its return." Sarah looked at the microchip in her hand. "And if I refuse? Then I will take it from your corpse just as I should have done 3 years ago. You have 24 hours to consider my offer. I will contact you again tomorrow with instructions for the exchange." The line went dead, leaving Sarah alone with a decision that could determine not only her own fate, but potentially the lives of countless innocent people. Sarah spent the rest of the day formulating a plan. She couldn't simply hand over the microchip to Kozlov, but she also couldn't ignore his threat. The man had already proven he was willing to use violence to get what he wanted, and he clearly had resources and connections that made him extremely dangerous. Her first priority was to make a backup of the information on the microchip. Using equipment from her storage locker, she was able to copy the data onto a secure drive. What she found when she examined the contents made her even more determined not to let it fall into Kozlov's hands. Chip contained detailed specifications for a shoulder-fired missile system that was compact enough to be easily concealed, but powerful enough to bring down a commercial airliner. The design was unlike anything she had seen before, incorporating technology that would make it virtually undetectable by conventional security measures. In the hands of terrorists or hostile nations, it would be a nightmare scenario for aviation security worldwide. Sarah contacted Colonel Harrison again and briefed him on the situation. He confirmed that the military would want the chip back, but he also acknowledged that she was essentially on her own until this was resolved. Official channels would take too long, and any formal military response might alert Kozlov that the government was involved. "You know what needs to be done, Sarah," Harrison said. "Kozlov can't be allowed to get that technology back, and he can't be allowed to continue threatening you or anyone else." Sarah understood what he was really telling her. This was going to be a black operation, off the books and with no official support. If something went wrong, the government would deny any knowledge of her actions. That evening, Sarah drove to the warehouse district where Kozlov had told his men to take her. She didn't plan to make contact tonight, but she wanted to survey the area and understand the tactical situation she would be facing. The warehouse was located in an industrial area with little traffic after business hours, making it an ideal location for the kind of illegal activities Kozlov was involved in. She parked several blocks away and approached on foot, using the shadows and abandoned buildings to remain undetected. The warehouse was larger than she had expected, and there were clear signs of recent activity: fresh tire tracks, security cameras that hadn't been there when the building was used for legitimate business, and guards posted at strategic locations. Through her binoculars, Sarah counted at least 6 men patrolling the perimeter. They were armed and appeared to be professionals, not the kind of street criminals Kozlov had hired to kidnap her. This was his main operation, and he was taking no chances with security. As she watched, a black SUV pulled up to the warehouse, and Sarah saw a man get out who matched the description of Kozlov. Even from a distance, she could see the scar on his left cheek that had been mentioned by the attacker in the park. He moved with the confidence of someone who was used to being in control. But Sarah also noticed that he favored his left leg slightly, probably another injury from the explosion 3 years ago. Sarah spent 2 hours observing the warehouse, mapping the guard positions and identifying potential entry points. The building had been modified since its last legitimate use, with additional security measures that suggested Kozlov was storing something valuable inside. She suspected it wasn't just weapons, but possibly drugs or other illegal merchandise that would fund his operations. When she returned home, Sarah found Detective Collins waiting on her front porch. He looked tired and concerned, and she could tell he had news that she wasn't going to like. "Ms. Martinez, I need to talk to you about the two men who attacked you last night." Sarah invited him inside and made coffee while he gathered his thoughts. She could sense that something significant had happened. "Both men were found dead in their hospital beds this morning," Collins said quietly. "It looks like they were poisoned. Something that worked fast and didn't leave obvious traces. The hospital staff didn't notice anything unusual until it was too late." Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. Kozlov was eliminating loose ends, making sure that no one could provide information about his operation to the authorities. It also sent a clear message to her. He was serious about recovering the microchip, and he was willing to kill anyone who got in his way. "Do you have any idea who might have done this?" Collins asked. Sarah considered telling him everything, but she knew that would only put him in danger. Kozlov had already demonstrated his willingness to kill, and involving local law enforcement would likely result in more innocent deaths. "Detective, I think this is connected to something much bigger than a simple kidnapping attempt. These people are dangerous, and I don't want you or your officers getting hurt because of me." Collins studied her face carefully. "Ms. Martinez, I've been a cop long enough to recognize when someone is holding back information. If there's something you need to tell me, now would be a good time. What I need is for you to trust me when I say that the best thing you can do right now is stay away from this situation. Focus on protecting the other people in this town." Collins clearly wasn't satisfied with her answer, but he also seemed to understand that pushing her for more information wasn't going to work. "Will you at least promise me that you'll call if you need help?" Sarah nodded, though she knew that by the time she might need his help, it would probably be too late for conventional law enforcement to make a difference. After Collins left, Sarah's secure phone rang again. This time it was Kozlov himself. "I trust you have had time to consider my offer," he said without preamble. "I'm still thinking about it," Sarah replied. "Perhaps this will help you decide more quickly. I have taken the liberty of learning more about your new life in this charming little town. The librarian who works with you, Mrs. Henderson, has such lovely grandchildren, and that Detective Collins who visited you tonight seems like a dedicated public servant." The threat was clear, and Sarah felt anger rising in her chest. Kozlov was threatening innocent people to force her compliance. "If you hurt anyone in this town, I will make you regret it for the rest of your very short life," Sarah said, her voice deadly calm. Kozlov chuckled. "Ah, there is the soldier I remember. Very well, Major. You have until tomorrow night to bring me what I want. I will send you the location for the exchange. Come alone and bring the item, and no one else needs to get hurt. And if I bring you what you want, you'll leave these people alone? You have my word. Once I have my property back, I will have no further business in your little town." Sarah knew better than to trust the word of a man like Kozlov, but she also knew that she had to find a way to end this that didn't result in innocent people getting killed. She had 24 hours to come up with a plan that would neutralize the threat permanently while protecting the microchip from falling into the wrong hands. As she sat in her living room, surrounded by weapons and equipment that reminded her of a life she had tried to leave behind, Sarah realized that tomorrow night's confrontation would determine not just her own future, but the safety of everyone she had come to care about in Millfield. Sarah spent the morning making preparations that would have seemed extreme to anyone who didn't understand the stakes involved. She contacted a former colleague who worked in explosive ordnance disposal and arranged for a special delivery that would arrive by early afternoon. She also reached out to her friend Marcus Webb, another former special operations soldier who now worked as a private security consultant. Marcus arrived at her house within 3 hours of her call, bringing with him equipment and expertise that she would need for what she was planning. He was a tall, lean man with sharp eyes who had served alongside Sarah on several dangerous missions. When she explained the situation, he didn't hesitate to offer his help. "So, let me get this straight," Marcus said as he examined the microchip. "This Kozlov character wants revenge for a mission that nearly killed him 3 years ago, and he's threatening innocent civilians to get this technology back." "That's the situation," Sarah confirmed. "And I can't let him have it, but I also can't let him hurt people in this town." Marcus nodded grimly. "Then we take him out permanently. You've got a location for the meet?" As if summoned by his question, Sarah's phone buzzed with a text message containing coordinates and a time: midnight at an abandoned airfield 20 miles outside of town. The location was isolated, which would work to both sides' advantage. Kozlov would have room to position his men and control the area, but Sarah would also have multiple escape routes and opportunities to use tactics that wouldn't be possible in a populated area. "Midnight at the old Morrison airfield," Sarah said, then paused as she realized the significance. He's using the Morrison name because of the airfield. That's probably been his base of operations this whole time. Marcus pulled up satellite images of the location on his laptop. The airfield had been abandoned for over a decade, but the runways were still intact, and there were several hangars that could house vehicles and equipment. It was the perfect location for someone like Kozlov to operate without interference. "This is good terrain for what we need to do," Marcus observed. "Open sight lines, multiple approach routes, and far enough from civilization that we don't have to worry about collateral damage, the explosives." Expert arrived at 2 in the afternoon, with a package that looked like ordinary electronics equipment but contained enough C4 to level a small building. Sarah's plan was ambitious. She would appear to comply with Kozlov's demands while actually setting a trap that would eliminate him and his entire operation. She spent the afternoon modifying the microchip's protective case to include a small but powerful explosive device. To anyone examining it casually, it would look like the original item, but if someone tried to access the data or if Sarah triggered a remote detonator, the chip and anyone nearby would be destroyed. Meanwhile, Marcus positioned himself at the airfield to conduct advance reconnaissance. He reported back that Kozlov had indeed been using the location as his base. There were at least 12 armed men on site, along with several vehicles and what appeared to be a substantial weapons cache stored in one of the hangars. "This guy isn't just planning to get his chip back and disappear," Marcus reported over their secure radio link. "He's got enough firepower here to outfit a small army. Whatever he's planning next, it's going to be big." This information reinforced Sarah's conviction that Kozlov could not be allowed to survive this confrontation. He wasn't just seeking revenge. He was actively planning future operations that would put countless lives at risk. As evening approached, Sarah made her final preparations. She dressed in dark tactical clothing and equipped herself with weapons, communication gear, and the modified microchip. She also carried a backup plan. If everything went wrong and she couldn't eliminate Kozlov's entire operation, she had enough explosives to destroy the airfield and everything on it, including herself if necessary. Detective Collins appeared at her door just as she was about to leave. He took one look at her tactical gear and weapons and realized that his suspicions about her background had been correct. "Ms. Martinez, or whoever you really are, I don't know what's going on here, but I can't let you leave town armed like that," Sarah sighed. She had hoped to avoid this confrontation, but Collins was too good a cop to ignore the obvious signs that something major was about to happen. "Detective, my name really is Sarah Martinez, and I really do work at the library. But I used to be Major Sarah Martinez, U.S. Army Special Operations. The people who tried to kidnap me are part of an international criminal organization, and they're threatening this town to get to me." Collins stared at her for a moment, processing this information. "And you're planning to handle this yourself?" "It's what I was trained for, and it's the only way to keep innocent people safe. If I involve local law enforcement, more people will die. How can I help?" Sarah was surprised by his response. She had expected him to try to stop her or insist on calling in federal authorities. "The best thing you can do is make sure your officers stay away from the old Morrison airfield tonight. Whatever happens there, it's going to be dangerous, and your people aren't equipped to handle this kind of threat." Collins nodded slowly. "I'll make sure the area stays clear. But Sarah, if you don't come back from this, and if I don't come back, contact Colonel James Harrison at Fort Bragg. Tell him that Operation Nighthawk is complete." As Sarah drove toward the airfield, she thought about the peaceful life she had built in Millfield over the past 3 years. Working at the library, getting to know her neighbors, feeling safe for the first time since leaving the military, all of that was about to end one way or another. Her radio crackled with Marcus's voice providing updates on enemy positions. Kozlov had positioned his men well, with overlapping fields of fire covering all the obvious approach routes to the main hangar where the exchange was supposed to take place. "Sarah, I count 14 hostiles now. 2 more arrived in the last hour. They've got night vision equipment and military-grade weapons. This isn't going to be easy." "Nothing worthwhile ever is," Sarah replied, checking her watch. She had 30 minutes before the scheduled meeting time. She parked her vehicle a mile from the airfield and began her approach on foot, using the darkness and her knowledge of tactical movement to stay undetected. The plan was simple in concept but would require precise timing and flawless execution. She would appear to comply with Kozlov's demands, get close enough to confirm his identity and location, then trigger the explosive device that would eliminate him and the microchip simultaneously. Marcus would provide overwatch and deal with any survivors who tried to escape the initial blast. The goal was to ensure that none of Kozlov's operations survived to continue threatening innocent people. As Sarah moved through the tall grass surrounding the airfield, she could see lights in the main hangar and figures moving around the perimeter. These weren't street criminals or hired thugs. They moved with the discipline and coordination of professional soldiers. Kozlov had assembled a small army for this operation. At exactly midnight, Sarah walked openly toward the hangar, her hands visible and the modified microchip case clearly displayed. Immediately, she was surrounded by armed men who searched her for weapons but allowed her to keep the case. They escorted her into the hangar where Viktor Kozlov was waiting. Seeing him up close for the first time in 3 years, Sarah was struck by how much the explosion had changed him. The scar on his face was deeper than she had expected, and his left arm hung slightly stiffly at his side. But his eyes were the same, cold, calculating, and filled with a hatred that had sustained him through years of planning for this moment. "Major Martinez," Kozlov said with a slight smile. "You look well. The quiet life seems to agree with you." "Let's just get this over with," Sarah replied, holding up the case. "This is what you want, right?" Kozlov gestured to one of his men, who stepped forward with a device that appeared to be some kind of scanner. "Forgive me if I don't simply take your word for it. I need to verify that the contents are genuine before we conclude our business." This was the moment Sarah had been preparing for. If Kozlov's scanner detected the explosive device she had hidden in the case, her plan would fail before it even began. But she had been counting on his arrogance and impatience. After 3 years of searching for the microchip, she hoped he would be too eager to get his hands on it to conduct a truly thorough examination. The technician with the scanner approached the case carefully, running his device over its surface. Sarah forced herself to remain calm and appear resigned to the situation, even as her heart pounded with the knowledge that everything depended on the next few seconds. The explosive device was well concealed, but if Kozlov's equipment was sophisticated enough, it might detect the anomaly. After what felt like an eternity but was probably only 30 seconds, the technician stepped back and nodded to Kozlov. "The readings are consistent with the specifications we have on file. It appears to be genuine." Kozlov's smile widened as he gestured for the case to be brought to him. "Excellent. You see, Major, this could have been accomplished much more easily 3 years ago if you had simply returned my property when you had the chance." "I didn't even know I had it," Sarah said truthfully. "It was chaos in that warehouse. I was just trying to survive." "And yet you managed to walk away with something worth millions of dollars to the right buyers," Kozlov replied, taking the case from his technician. "Do you have any idea how many governments would pay handsomely for this technology?" Sarah watched as Kozlov held the case, savoring his moment of triumph. She had the detonator concealed in her jacket pocket, and all it would take was pressing a single button to end this. But she needed to make sure that as many of his men as possible were in the blast radius when she triggered it. "So what happens now?" Sarah asked. "You said you'd leave Millfield alone if I brought you what you wanted." "And I am a man of my word," Kozlov said. "Your little town and its inhabitants are safe. You, however, are a different matter entirely." Sarah had expected this. Men like Kozlov didn't leave loose ends, especially not ones who had already proven they could be dangerous. "You're going to kill me regardless," Sarah stated. "I'm afraid so. You understand too much about my operations, and you've already demonstrated that you're far too capable to be allowed to live. But I want you to know that your death will serve a greater purpose. The technology you've returned to me will fund operations that will reshape the balance of power in several regions of the world." As Kozlov spoke, Sarah noticed that more of his men were gathering in the hangar. This was exactly what she had hoped for. Marcus's voice whispered through her nearly invisible earpiece so quietly that only she could hear it. "I count 12 hostiles in the hangar now, plus Kozlov. 2 more on the roof and 3 patrolling the perimeter. When you trigger the device, I'll take out the external guards." Sarah nodded almost imperceptibly, then looked back at Kozlov. Before you kill me, I have to ask something. How did you survive that explosion 3 years ago? Kozlov seemed pleased to have an opportunity to gloat about his escape. I was not in the warehouse when your military friends decided to level it. I had stepped outside to take a phone call, pure chance. The explosion threw me 50 feet and left me with these souvenirs. He gestured to his scars. But it also gave me the motivation to track you down. And the files you stole from the military facility? A contact in your intelligence community. Someone who believes that your government's foreign policy is too aggressive and needs to be, corrected. He provided me with everything I needed to find you. This was valuable intelligence that Sarah wished she could pass on to Colonel Harrison, but she suspected she wouldn't have the opportunity. Still, knowing that there was a mole in the intelligence community was important information. I suppose I should thank you, Sarah said, moving slightly closer to the group of armed men. You've given me closure about what happened that night. How gracious of you, Kozlov replied sarcastically. He then nodded to his men. Killer! This was the moment Sarah had been waiting for. As the guards raised their weapons, she dove behind a stack of crates while simultaneously pressing the detonator button. The explosion was tremendous, far more powerful than anyone in the hangar could have anticipated. The modified microchip case disintegrated instantly, taking Kozlov and the 6 men closest to him with it. The blast wave knocked down everyone else in the hangar and sent shrapnel flying in all directions. Sarah had positioned herself behind the heaviest cover available, but even so, the concussion left her ears ringing and her vision blurred. She forced herself to move immediately, knowing that any survivors would be disoriented and vulnerable for only a few seconds. Drawing her sidearm, Sarah systematically eliminated the remaining men in the hangar who were still moving. Her military training took over completely, and she moved with lethal efficiency through the smoke and debris. Outside, she could hear the sharp crack of Marcus's sniper rifle as he dealt with the perimeter guards. Within 2 minutes of the explosion, the airfield was silent except for the crackling of flames from burning debris. Sarah made her way outside, her legs unsteady from the blast effects. Marcus emerged from his position and jogged toward her, his rifle slung across his back. Status report, Sarah called out as he approached. All external guards down. The hangar is completely destroyed and I count 14 confirmed kills inside. Kozlov? Dead. I saw him take the full force of the blast. Sarah looked around at the burning wreckage. What about the weapons cache? Secondary explosions took care of most of it. Whatever Kozlov was planning, he won't be doing it now. Sarah nodded, feeling a mixture of relief and exhaustion. The immediate threat was over, but she knew there would be consequences. The destruction of the airfield would draw attention from law enforcement and possibly federal authorities. Her quiet life in Millfield was definitely over now. We need to get out of here, Marcus said, echoing her thoughts. Local emergency services will have seen that explosion from miles away. As they walked back toward their vehicles, Sarah's secure phone rang. It was Colonel Harrison. Sarah, we just detected a significant explosion at your location. What's your status? Mission accomplished, Colonel. Kozlov is dead, the microchip is destroyed, and his entire operation has been eliminated. Outstanding work. Major, you'll be interested to know that we've also identified and arrested the intelligence mole who was feeding information to Kozlov. That security breach has been sealed. Sarah felt another wave of relief. At least she wouldn't have to worry about other enemies finding her through compromised government files. What about the official story? She asked. As far as anyone knows, there was an accidental explosion at an abandoned airfield where illegal weapons were being stored. No military involvement, no classified technology, just a criminal operation that ended badly. Sarah understood. This would be another black operation that officially never happened, with no recognition or record of her actions. That was fine with her. She had never done this work for glory or recognition. As she drove away from the burning airfield, Sarah realized that she was at a crossroads. She could try to return to her quiet life in Millfield, but the events of the past few days had changed everything. Detective Collins would have questions. Her neighbors would be curious about the explosions and police activity, and she would always wonder if there were other enemies from her past who might track her down. Alternatively, she could accept that her attempt at a civilian life was over and return to the world she had tried to leave behind. Colonel Harrison would welcome her back, and there would always be missions that required her particular skills. For now, though Sarah just wanted to go home and sit in her quiet house on Maple Street, surrounded by books and the simple pleasures of a life where the most dangerous thing she encountered was an overdue library fine. 3 weeks after the explosion at Morrison Airfield, life in Millfield had settled into a new normal. The official story had held up perfectly. Authorities announced that they had discovered an illegal weapons storage facility that had been destroyed in an accidental explosion. No civilians were harmed, and the investigation was being handled by federal agencies. Sarah returned to work at the library, where her colleagues peppered her with questions about the excitement that had briefly disrupted their peaceful town. She deflected most inquiries with modest claims that she had simply been in the wrong place at the wrong time when criminals had tried to rob her. Detective Collins, however, wasn't satisfied with simple explanations. He visited the library on a quiet Tuesday afternoon when Sarah was working alone in the reference section. "Ms. Martinez," he said quietly, approaching her desk. "I think we need to have a conversation." Sarah looked up from the book catalog she was updating. "About what, detective?" "About the fact that 2 professional kidnappers tried to grab you, ended up dead in the hospital, and then a major criminal operation exploded 20 miles from town. About the fact that you disappeared for several hours on the night of that explosion, and about the fact that you handle yourself like someone with serious military training." Sarah set down her pen and gave Collins her full attention. She had been expecting this conversation and had prepared for it. "Detective, sometimes people have backgrounds that they prefer to keep private. I've never lied to you about anything important, but I also haven't told you everything about my past." Collins sat down across from her desk. "The federal agents who came to investigate the explosion asked me a lot of questions about you. They seemed very interested in your activities that night." "And what did you tell them?" "I told them that you were a helpful citizen who had been the victim of a crime and had cooperated fully with local law enforcement. I also told them that whatever happened at that airfield, it made Millfield a safer place." Sarah studied his face, trying to determine how much he had actually figured out. Collins was a good detective, and she suspected he had connected more dots than he was letting on. "Thank you for that," she said simply. "Sarah, I don't know who you really are or what you did before you came to Millfield, but I know you're not just a librarian. I also know that whatever happened these past few weeks, you handled it in a way that protected this town and its people." Collins stood up and walked toward the door, then turned back to face her. "If you ever need anything, or if trouble like this ever finds you again, I want you to know that you have friends here who will stand with you." After he left, Sarah sat alone in the quiet library, surrounded by thousands of books in the peaceful atmosphere she had grown to love. For the first time since the whole ordeal began, she allowed herself to really consider what she wanted to do next. That evening, her secure phone rang. It was Marcus calling from wherever his next assignment had taken him. "How are you adjusting to civilian life again?" he asked. "It's strange," Sarah admitted. "Part of me misses the adrenaline and the sense of purpose that comes with missions like the one we just completed. But another part of me loves the idea of never having to kill anyone again." "I understand. But you know that what we did was necessary, right? Kozlov would have sold that technology to the highest bidder, and hundreds of innocent people could have died." "I know. That doesn't make it easier." Marcus was quiet for a moment. "Sarah, I've got something to tell you. Colonel Harrison asked me to pass along a message. The intelligence community is forming a new unit, something that operates with more autonomy than traditional military structures. They want experienced people who can handle situations like the Kozlov problem without official oversight or bureaucratic complications." Sarah had been expecting this offer. Her successful handling of the Kozlov situation had demonstrated exactly the kind of skills and judgment that special operations commanders valued most. What kind of unit? Small teams, hand-picked operators, missions that officially never happen. You'd have significant latitude to choose your own assignments and methods. The pay is excellent, and you'd be doing work that actually matters. And if I'm not interested, then you go back to your library books and nobody bothers you again. But Sarah, there are more people like Kozlov out there. People who threaten innocent civilians to achieve their goals. The question is whether you want to be the one who stops them. After Marcus hung up, Sarah walked through her house, looking at all the small touches that had made it feel like home over the past 3 years. The books on every available surface, the comfortable furniture she had chosen for relaxation rather than tactical advantage, The photographs of library events and community gatherings where she had gradually become part of something larger than herself. She thought about Mrs. Henderson, the elderly librarian who had become like a grandmother to her, about the children who came in after school looking for help with homework or recommendations for new books to read, about Detective Collins and his quiet offer of friendship and support. For 3 years, she had told herself that she wanted nothing more than this peaceful, ordinary life. But the events with Kozlov had awakened something in her that she had tried to suppress. The satisfaction of using her skills to protect innocent people, the clarity of purpose that came with confronting genuine evil, and the knowledge that there were threats in the world that required someone with her particular talents to address. Sarah made her decision and picked up her secure phone to call Colonel Harrison. "Colonel, it's Sarah. I've been thinking about Marcus's message. And? I'm not ready to come back full-time, but I might be interested in consulting work. Situations like Kozlov, where innocent people are threatened and conventional approaches aren't sufficient. That could be arranged. You'd maintain your civilian life as cover, but when we need someone with your capabilities, you'd be available." "On one condition," Sarah said. "I choose my own missions. If I don't believe in the cause or think the risks are justified, I walk away." "Agreed. Welcome back to the fight, Major." The next morning, Sarah went to work at the library as usual. She helped Mrs. Henderson organize the children's section, assisted a college student with research for a history paper, and spent her lunch break reading in the quiet corner where she had spent so many peaceful hours over the past 3 years. But now she also had a secure communication device hidden in her desk, and she knew that someday soon it would buzz with information about a threat that required her unique combination of skills and judgment to address. Sarah had found a way to have both lives. The peaceful existence she had built in Millfield, and the sense of purpose that came from protecting innocent people from those who would harm them. She was no longer just a librarian, but she was also no longer just a soldier. She was exactly who she was meant to be. Someone who could appear to be an ordinary civilian while possessing extraordinary capabilities. Someone who could live quietly among good people while standing ready to confront evil when it emerged from the shadows. As she helped a young boy find a book about dinosaurs, Sarah smiled at the thought that her neighbors would never know that their friendly librarian was also one of the most dangerous people in the world when the situation required it, and that was exactly how she wanted it to be. The phone in her desk remained silent, but Sarah knew it was only a matter of time before the next Kozlov appeared somewhere in the world. When that happened, she would be ready to remind them that sometimes the most dangerous person in the room is the one who looks the most ordinary.